Okay, so your test is tomorrow, and since I'm not here, I figured I would do a couple questions from the trig review. The solutions are given to the supply teacher, so if you want to check your answers, just go see them, and they'll give you the right answers. So for the first question, I'm not doing both. I'm only going to do one, and you can attempt to do the other. So I'm going to start with question A, and then we'll see where we can go. So the question says, write the ratios for sine, cos, and tan of angle R. So the first thing you want to do here is you want to put a little symbol showing that we're working from angle R. So the word ratios means you're creating a fraction. So if you read the question carefully, it wants you to create fractions or ratios. So if you go back into your lessons or in your survival guide, you should have written somewhere that those ratios come from so, ka, and then toa. So to start for doing sine of angle R, I'm just going to write sine of R equals. But you can't do any of this until you label your sides. So we're just going to go ahead and label the sides with the opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. So I'm working from angle R, so don't forget that. Working from here, it's a right angle triangle, so across from the right angle, we have a hypotenuse. Across from the angle we're working from, which is angle R, we have the opposite. And then the last side is the adjacent. So now we can go ahead and fill in what sine of R is. So what I want to see on your test, I want to see the ratio. So sine of R is the opposite over the hypotenuse. Sine of R, the opposite in this case is 3.6. The hypotenuse in this case is 6. And then we're going to reduce this. We have to leave it in fractions, and we're going to just leave it as sine of R. So when we take out our calculator, you want to make sure that your float is set to float. You're not really calculating anything here. You're just going to simplify this fraction. So you go 3.6. This little line here means to divide. So 3.6 divided by 6. It gives you an answer, but we don't want decimals. It says in the question in fractions. So this is where you press the button Math, and you press Enter and Enter again. So this fraction becomes 3 over 5 when it's reduced. Okay? So when I pressed Math, Enter, Enter, it gave me 3 over 5. Now how I get there is you take your 3.6 and you divide by 3, and it gives you, whoops, if you go 3.6 divided by 3, you get 1.2. So this means that you can divide the top by 1.2, and that you can divide, or it's a times, sorry, in this case. I'm just going to take a look here. So it's 3.6 times 1.2. Oh, that's not working. So it's a division. I was right in the first place. You divide the 3.6 by 1.2. You don't really need to know how you get there, but I just kind of want to show you in case you're curious. 3.6 divided by 1.2 is 3, and if you check 6 divided by 1.2, it gives you 5. So that's how we got there. But again, you don't need to write this part down. I really just want you to be able to use the math function and getting it into fractions. Okay, so it's very important that you know how to do that. If you need the supply to replay this, then just ask them, and I'm sure that they will. Okay, so there's the sine ratio, but that's not all we want. So I'm going to put a check mark for the sine ratio. Let's go ahead and do the cosine ratio of the same angle. So we don't need to relabel our sides because we're going from the same angle for sine, cos, and actually for tan as well. Okay, so cosine of R is adjacent over hypotenuse, and then our adjacent in this case is 4.8. Our hypotenuse in this case is 6, and let's see if that reduces. So again, we divide 4.8 by 6, and it gives us a decimal, which we don't want. I need you to press Math, Enter for fraction, and Enter again, and it gives us 4 over 5 this time. So cosine of R equals 4 over 5. And then we continue on to tan. For the tan ratio, it's opposite over adjacent. Okay. And the opposite in this situation is 3.6. The adjacent is 4.8. I know that when I divide these two things, these two numbers, it's going to give me a decimal. And I have to go ahead and press math, enter, enter again, and it's 3/4. So tan of r equals 3/4. That's for one question. So you need to make sure that you understand how to label your sides, and you also need to make sure that you're able to reduce the fractions. Those two things will be very important to solve a question like this. And this review is very, very similar to your test. So if you're able to do the questions that I'm doing with you and you've attempted some on your own, then you've done more than enough studying. But if you don't look at this at all, then you're going to have a hard time tomorrow on your test. So you can go ahead and try question B on your own. We're going to go ahead and do a question from number 2. So question 2 wants to find the measures of angles. So you're not doing trigonometric ratios, you're doing the measure of an angle. So in this triangle, it's a 90-degree angle triangle. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is label my sides. Across from the 90 degrees is the hypotenuse. And then you have to determine which angle you're going to work from. So I'm going to work from P first. I'm going to find angle P, which means that my opposite is going to be 2.7, and my adjacent will be 3. If I choose to go and find angle N first, that's not wrong, but you have to switch up your opposite and your adjacent. So I just did it in order to find angle P first. So you want to write that down. Find angle P. Now you have to be given something, and we are. We're given the opposite, which is 2.7 meters, and we're also given the adjacent, which is 3.0 meters. And in this case, because I can see the letters O and A on here, if I scroll back up, I know that I'm going to be using my tan ratio because I was given the opposite and the adjacent. I see the words or the letters O and A. So I'm going to write to use the tan ratio, but tan of what angle? We don't have an angle. It's not given. So you write the angle that you're finding. And don't forget to use capital letters. Okay? So tan of P equals opposite over adjacent, because that's the ratio for tan. Tan of capital P. Now we have the opposite, it's 2.7, and we have the adjacent, which is 3.0. This is the tough part. At this point, you have to find angle P. And to find angle P, I just want angle P. That's all I want. So I need to cancel out the tan. But I can't just cross it out without doing anything. So the opposite operation of tan is the inverse of tan, which is tan -1. Now don't forget what you do with your fraction. A fraction means that you're dividing the top by the bottom. So I'll show you what that looks like. As soon as you press second tan, a fraction or a bracket opens up, so you know that you need to do something. So this is when I'm just going to divide 2.7 and 3.0. So here I need to round to the nearest degree. You have a couple choices. You can look at this and say, okay, nearest degree is 0 decimals, so this would be either 41 degrees or 42 degrees. Now I know it's 42 degrees because there's a 9 after my decimal, so I have to bring the 1 up to a 2. So this to me is 42 degrees. But if you have a rough time rounding, I want you to click on the button mode and go to 0. Nearest degree is 0 decimals. Clear out of there, press enter again, and it rounds it for you. So it basically tells you that angle P is approximately 42 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put 42 degrees on the inside. It's a little bit hard to do because it's so small. And I'm going to highlight it in green just to show you that I found that. To find the other angle, you don't need to do that. All you need to do to find angle N is know that inside a triangle, there's a sum of 180 degrees. So if you subtract the 42 degrees that you just found and the 90 degrees that you just found, you end up with 48 degrees. So the only thing left to do here is just to make sure that you have a little bit of a concluding statement that says that angle P is equal to approximately 42 degrees and angle N is equal to 48 degrees, and that's approximately for both. Okay, so make sure that you have this concluding statement on your test because it's nice and easy to see. For question 3, for the following triangle, you have to find both missing lengths this time. So it's not an angle, it's a length. And the missing length in this example would be side M, and the other one is side L. Now there's 2 ways to do this. You can pick whichever side you want to start with, but because there's only one side given, you cannot do Pythagorean theorem. So we have to use SOHCAHTOA, and I'm just going to rewrite it up here so we have it in order to find the side. So I'm going to go ahead and find side L first. Okay, side L. And I'll do it in cursive so it's easier to see. So to find side L, I need to label everything according to the angle that's given. So here's the angle that's given right in here. Okay, so the opposite side of the 90-degree angle is called the hypotenuse. The opposite from the angle that's given is the opposite. And then we're looking for side L, which is the adjacent. Okay, so side L is equal to the adjacent. Now, we're looking for side L, which means we're looking for the adjacent, which means we have to be given something else. And if I look at my diagram, I'm given the 27 millimeters, which is my opposite. But I'm also given 18.2 degrees. So based on these 2 letters, you have to go back up to your diagram and take a look at which 2 letters this matches. So it's not O and H, it's not A and H, it's O and A. So we're going to be using tan of 18.2 degrees to create our ratio. And remember that it's opposite over adjacent. You can't mix that up, because if you mix that up, then you get the wrong answers. So let's fill in the values. Tan of 18.2 degrees. The opposite is 27, and the adjacent is unknown. So I'm going to leave it as A for adjacent or L. So there's a problem here. The unknown is at the bottom, which means you need to flip it. But you need to flip both fractions, and this one is not a fraction. So we have to create a fraction, put it over 1, and flip both fractions. So we get 1 over tan of 18.2 degrees equals L over 27. At this point, we can cancel out the division by 27 by multiplying both sides by 27. So I do 1 times 27, which is 27. Tan of 18.2 degrees equals L. Remember that this line means to divide. Okay, so it's very important to know that when you do this in your calculator, that you're going to be dividing 27 by tan of 18.2. So 27 divided by tan of 18.2. This is what it's going to look like when I press enter. Remember that I kept my float as 0. So I got 82. If I put my mode float back to float, I press enter, I get a lot of decimals. So if I need to round this to the nearest decimal, 1 decimal place, that means that I have to make sure that I keep the 82.1, not 82.2, 82.1. 82.1, and we have units, so it's millimeters in this problem. So I found L, and now I have to go ahead and find M. Well, to find M, we already have 2 sides. So what I can do here is use the Pythagorean theorem to find side M. So find side M. You can use SOHCAHTOA if you want, if you prefer. Just make sure you get the same or close to the same answer. Now, I already have the hypotenuse. Or no, sorry, I'm looking for the hypotenuse. L is 82.1 millimeters. So I'm looking for the hypotenuse, which means I need to use the formula c squared equals a squared plus b squared, because this c represents the hypotenuse. Okay, I'm not looking for a side, I'm looking for the hypotenuse. So all I do here is I take my other 2 sides and I square them. Okay, so on my calculator, I can go ahead and evaluate 82.1 squared, 6,740.41, and then I can go ahead and do 27 squared, which is 729. We can add those 2 numbers together.